You feel the sentence before you understand it, not because it is spoken with force, but because something in it moves beneath the words, like a current beneath dark water. Empaths are not born to heal. They are born to awaken the collective shadow. Such a statement disturbs the sentimental imagination, because it removes the empath from the role of comforter and places them instead in the far more dangerous position of revealer. Most people can tolerate being soothed, far fewer can tolerate being seen, and fewer still can bear the moment in which what has been hidden in them begins, under the gaze of another soul, to stir. It is one of the great confusions of our age that sensitivity has been mistaken for softness. You have been taught, perhaps from childhood, that the one who feels deeply must naturally be the one who repairs, forgives, absorbs, and restores harmony. This is the moral myth placed upon the sensitive person. It appears noble. It appears almost sacred. Yet when examined psychologically, it conceals an extraordinary violence. For to assign a human being the task of endless healing is to make them servant to a wound that was not theirs to create. It is to chain perception to maintenance. It is to take the one who can feel the invisible life in a room and force that gift into labor for the comfort of others. But the psyche does not create such beings merely for usefulness. Nature is never so sentimental. When a certain kind of soul appears again and again across generations, culture, and families, we must ask not what function society has assigned to it, but what archetypal necessity has given rise to it. And here we come closer to the truth. The empath does not emerge in the human drama simply to console pain. The empath emerges wherever the buried contents of the collective life have grown too dense to remain concealed. Such a person becomes, often without wishing it, a threshold figure. Through them, what has been denied begins to vibrate. Through them, the atmosphere thickens. Through them, people feel things they were not prepared to know about themselves. This is why the empath is so often loved at first and resisted later. The beginning is deceptive. At first, people experience such a presence as relief. They feel understood without having explained themselves. They feel accompanied in places where language has failed them. They feel, perhaps for the first time, that someone has entered the emotional climate they inhabit rather than merely responding to its surface events. This produces attachment. It may even produce reverence. Yet beneath that gratitude, another process is already unfolding. For the true effect of deep empathy is not merely that it comforts what is conscious, it also disturbs what is unconscious. It creates, in the other, a subtle pressure. Things long exiled from awareness begin to gather near the threshold. Shame becomes restless, falsity becomes visible, defensive structures, once invisible because they were habitual, begin to feel theatrical, heavy, and exposed. You must understand that the shadow does not like to be awakened. It does not object as the moral mind objects. It objects more primitively. It resists as a trapped animal resists light. The shadow is not merely evil. This is a childish misunderstanding. It is everything in the personality that has been rejected, disowned, split off, or banished into psychic darkness because the ego could not reconcile itself with it. This includes cruelty, envy, cowardice, hunger for domination, secret pleasure in another's weakness. but it also includes vitality, instinct, erotic life, creative rage, forbidden intelligence, and unlived authority. The shadow is not one thing, it is the whole denied underside of the visible self, and because it is denied, it does not vanish. It accumulates force when enough individuals deny enough of themselves for long enough. Something greater than personal repression begins to form. It becomes social, it becomes familial, it becomes historical. Then we no longer speak only of the personal shadow, but of the collective shadow, the dark inheritance of all that a group, a culture, a people, or a civilization cannot bear to recognize in itself. We see it in persecution, in moral hypocrisy, in ideological fanaticism, in the need to make enemies, in the sentimental worship of innocence, in the relentless projection of evil onto the outsider. What is disowned within seeks embodiment without. This is one of the most tragic laws of psychic life. And now you may begin to see why the empath occupies so strange and often painful a place in the human order. For where others are defended by numbness, the empath is permeable. Where others move past contradiction because they have learned not to feel its friction, the empath registers it. A room may appear calm, yet the empath feels aggression beneath politeness. A family may speak in the language of loyalty, yet the empath senses fear, resentment, sacrifice, an undeclared debt moving invisibly among its members. An institution may call itself righteous, yet the empath feels the coldness beneath its ideals. This perception is rarely welcome. The collective prefers those who confirm its stories. It fears those who feel its omissions. Here lies the hidden burden of the empathic nature. You are told you are kind, when what people often mean is that you have not yet forced them into confrontation with themselves. You are praised for understanding when what they desire is often permission to remain fragmented without consequence. The moment your seeing acquires weight, the moment it ceases to serve adaptation and begins instead to reveal contradiction, the atmosphere changes. You are no longer merely sensitive, you become dangerous, not because you attack, but because your presence alters the arrangement by which others have stayed asleep. This often begins long before adulthood. In childhood, the future empath is rarely the strongest voice in the room. More often, such a child is the one who feels what adults cannot name. The tension between parents before words sharpen into conflict, the disappointment hidden beneath a mother's devotion, the bitterness concealed beneath a father's silence, the family secret that has not been spoken but has already shaped everyone's posture. The child feels these things not conceptually but atmospherically. It is as if the soul develops years before the intellect develops language. Such children become readers of weather, not outer weather, but psychic weather. They learn to detect disturbance by tone, pause, gesture, and absence. Often they are praised for maturity. In truth, they have adapted to an environment in which emotional truth was too dangerous to be spoken plainly. From this adaptation, a pattern forms. The child who senses the wound of the environment often begins by trying to regulate it. This is where the myth of the healer begins. Because you felt dissonance early, you may have assumed responsibility for reducing it. You may have become agreeable, perceptive, unusually forgiving, careful not to intensify what was already unstable. You may have learned to soothe, before being soothed, to understand before being understood. This can make the empath appear loving. Often it is loving, but psychologically, it is also a survival structure. It is a way of maintaining connection in a field where truth has become dangerous. Yet what begins as adaptation may conceal another destiny. Beneath the wish to heal is often a deeper compulsion, the compulsion to bring hidden things into relation. This is not moral. It is archetypal. It belongs to the nature of consciousness itself. The psyche seeks wholeness, and wholeness requires confrontation with what has been split off. The empath, precisely because of unusual sensitivity to contradiction, becomes an instrument of this process. You may think you are simply trying to understand a person, but in that understanding, something in them begins to tremble. They speak to you, and suddenly their own voice sounds false to them. They describe their suffering, and in the very act of speaking, they begin to feel their complicity in it. They reach toward you for comfort, and instead they encounter a mirror, not a cruel mirror, not a condemning mirror, a living mirror, one that reflects not only the pain they know, but the darkness they have avoided. This is why certain relationships with empathic people become so intense, so fated, and so unstable. The other person believes, at first, that they have found rescue. In one sense, they have found a passage, but every passage exacts a cost. For when the unconscious begins to move, the ego loses its sovereignty. The charming man begins to feel the hatred beneath his charm. The endlessly giving woman begins to sense her buried wish to destroy those who depend on her. The spiritual seeker begins to encounter envy, vanity, and hunger for power beneath the rhetoric of transcendence. The devoted parent begins to see possession inside what was called love. The empath does not invent these contents, but by entering relationship with unusual psychological depth, the empath constellates them. You must not underestimate the violence with which the psyche can defend itself against such revelation. Many of the most painful experiences in the life of an empath come not from overt enemies, but from those who once seemed to adore them. A person may cling to you while you are carrying their pain, then turn cold when your presence begins to expose the architecture of that pain. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, arrogant, too intense, too sensitive, too difficult. They may insist that you have harmed them when in truth what harmed them was proximity to their own unlived life. It is one of the bitterest ironies of psychological development that the person who awakens another's shadow is often blamed for the suffering of that awakening. This is why so many empaths live with confusion. They are told that if they were truly loving, they would continue to give comfort without disruption. They begin to believe that every rupture around them is their fault, but often the rupture was already there, concealed beneath compliance and mutual avoidance. Your presence did not create the fracture. It revealed that the structure was unstable from the beginning. The collective resents this. Families resent it. Communities resent it. Even lovers resent it. For the one who awakens shadow does not merely challenge behavior. They threaten the unconscious agreements by which identity has been maintained. And here we come to a distinction of great importance. Healing and awakening are not the same movement. Though they may later belong to the same process, healing is often imagined as restoration of comfort, reduction of pain, re-establishment of coherence. Awakening is something harsher. Awakening begins in disillusionment. It begins when an old form can no longer contain what is rising through it. One does not awaken because one feels safe. One awakens because what was hidden has become more unbearable than what will be required to face it. The empath, then, is not primarily a healer in the sentimental sense. The empath is often the one in whose presence comfort becomes impossible unless truth is admitted. This is why dreams so often accompany such encounters. When the collective shadow is stirred, the unconscious seeks images. A person who has entered the field of an empath may dream of dark houses, locked basements, wounded animals, faceless crowds, flooded rooms, mirrors that will not reflect properly, doubled figures, strangers wearing familiar clothes. These are not random productions. They are symbolic announcements that the psyche has begun rearranging itself around contents that were previously banished from daylight. The basement appears because something buried seeks recognition. The flood appears because affect has exceeded containment. The double appears because the self one has lived is no longer the whole self. The broken mirror appears because the ego image cannot integrate what is now visible. I have often said that the dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul. But when the empath enters the psychic life of another, that hidden door is often forced slightly open by the pressure of relation itself. Suddenly the dream life intensifies. Symbols darken. Repetition begins. One dreams the same corridor, the same pursuer, the same child left alone in the same room. This is not misfortune. It is the beginning of truth. Yet because truth first appears as disturbance, it is often rejected, and thus the empath becomes, once again, a paradoxical figure sought because they feel like home, feared because they disturb the false home built over the abyss. There is also a deeper layer still, for the empath is not outside the shadow. This must be said with utmost seriousness, because otherwise sensitivity becomes inflation. Many empaths unconsciously identify with innocence. They believe that because they feel pain deeply, because they have suffered misunderstanding, because they perceive what others deny, they themselves are free from participation in darkness. Nothing could be more dangerous. The one who awakens shadow in others must sooner or later confront the shadow within their own gift. Sensitivity can become seduction. Insight can become superiority. Attunement can become covert control. The ability to read others can become a secret intoxication. One may begin to derive identity from being the one who knows, the one who sees, the one who understands what no one else can understand. Then the archetype turns. The wounded seer becomes tyrannized by hidden pride. The rescuer begins to need brokenness around them in order to feel necessary. The revealer becomes attached to being the disturbance. The empath begins unconsciously to feed on intensity, mistaking psychic charge for intimacy. This, too, is shadow, and unless it is faced, the supposed awakener becomes merely another unconscious agent of fragmentation. For this reason, the true task of the empath is not to heal others, nor even simply to awaken them. The deeper task is to endure the moral and symbolic weight of carrying perception without becoming possessed by it, to feel without collapsing into what is felt, to see without worshipping sight, to awaken shadow without identifying oneself with light. This demands an inner discipline of immense difficulty. One must learn to stand in relation to darkness without either absorbing it or theatrically opposing it. One must become In a sense, a vessel capable of holding contradiction. This is where individuation begins in earnest. Individuation does not begin when you discover that you are special. It begins when you discover that what moves through you does not belong to your vanity. The empath, if such a person is to become more than a sacrificial instrument for the collective, must come to understand that sensitivity is not an identity but a function of relation to the unconscious. You are not valuable because you feel more than others. You are responsible because you are more permeable to what others cannot yet contain. This is a very different matter. One inflates the ego, the other humbles it. The collective shadow is not awakened by argument. It is not awakened by moral instruction. It is awakened when the presence of one human being disturbs the internal arrangement by which another has remained unconscious. This is why some of the most decisive encounters in life occur without visible drama. A conversation may appear ordinary from the outside, and yet afterward a person feels altered in some unnamed way. They return home unsettled. Old memories rise. A sentence you spoke continues to echo, not because it was clever, but because it carried an uncanny relation to something they had kept buried. Such moments belong to the mystery of psychic contagion, though the word contagion is too crude if understood only negatively. The psyche is not sealed, it is participatory. Human beings constellate one another. They evoke latent figures in one another. They activate sleeping conflicts. They call forth unrealized possibilities and long buried terrors. When an empath enters relation, it is often not the explicit content of the exchange that matters most. It is the atmosphere they bring. Such individuals often carry, without knowing it, a psychological honesty that unsettles defensive systems. They may speak gently, but something in them does not consent to collective falsification. They cannot fully inhabit surfaces that others accept without effort, and because of this, those around them begin to sense a demand. Though no demand has been spoken, it is the demand of reality itself. The lie grows heavy, the role begins to crack. The mechanical smile no longer entirely conceals the resentment beneath it. The story a person tells about their life begins to feel less convincing in the presence of someone who feels what has been left out of that story. This explains a phenomenon that has bewildered many sensitive souls. You may find that people confess things to you without intending to. They tell you more than they meant to tell. They reveal contradictions they had hoped to keep outside awareness. Or, in another register, they become evasive, irritable, or strangely performative around you, as though they feel the need to protect themselves from a gaze you are not even consciously directing at them. This is not magic in the childish sense. It is psychology in its oldest, most immediate form. The psyche knows when it is near an image of its own wholeness, and it knows when its fragments are in danger of becoming visible. Yet the movement toward wholeness is always ambivalent. No one approaches consciousness without resistance. The ego was built to maintain continuity, and continuity requires selective blindness. You imagine, perhaps, that people wish to know themselves. This is only partly true. They wish to know enough to remain morally coherent. They do not necessarily wish to know enough to be transformed. To be transformed means that the old self can no longer remain intact. It means that cherished narratives must die. It means that one must encounter the humiliating fact that much of what one called virtue was adaptation, compensation, fear, or ambition in disguise. It means that the image one has offered the world must be weighed against the life one has secretly lived beneath that image. Therefore, when the empath awakens shadow, the first reaction is rarely gratitude. It is often withdrawal, accusation, idealization followed by devaluation, or a desperate attempt to force the empath back into the older role of comforter. This is especially true in families. The family is the first collective, it is the first temple and the first prison. Within it, each member unconsciously bears a portion of the total psychic economy. One carries ambition, another failure, another moral superiority, another sexual shame, another rage, another grief. These roles are not assigned rationally. They emerge through generations of adaptation to unspoken wounds. The future empath often becomes the one who registers the entire field, not because they are chosen by ceremony, but because they are constitutionally unable not to feel what others divide among themselves. In such a system, the empath's early task is usually to stabilize. They become translator, absorber, mediator, silent witness. The child who feels too much and therefore tries to make disturbance manageable. But if development proceeds far enough, something changes. The very person who once held the family together begins to perceive that what was held together was never whole. The harmony was purchased through distortion. Peace was maintained by silence. Love was mixed with fear, debt, dependency, guilt, and role-based possession. The empath begins to awaken not merely to the wounds of others, but to the architecture of the system itself. At that moment, they cease to function purely as healer. They become revelation, and revelation is intolerable to any system founded on dissociation. Then strange things occur. The empath is accused of becoming cold when they have simply stopped carrying what does not belong to them. They are called selfish when they no longer convert every tension into service. They are told they have changed when in truth they have ceased to maintain the false continuity others depended upon. Old guilt is activated. The family shadow rises in the form of moral language. After all we did for you, you are too sensitive. Why do you make everything so serious? You used to be easier to be around. Such phrases are not merely interpersonal complaints. They are defenses of a psychic arrangement. They are the voice of the collective shadow seeking to restore the old order. You must understand how subtle this can be. The collective shadow rarely appears wearing the mask of obvious evil. It appears as normalcy. It appears as custom, duty, amor, practicality, concern, loyalty, and common sense. It says, in effect, do not disturb what has allowed us to remain who we are. Do not bring depth where a role will suffice. Do not insist on consciousness where routine has protected us from collapse. The empath, by existing as a threshold figure, violates this injunction merely by perceiving too accurately, and if such a person begins to speak from that perception, the emotional atmosphere changes at once. This is why many empaths withdraw for long periods of life without fully understanding why. They think they are tired, and indeed they are tired. But the fatigue is not only personal, it is archetypal. To live as an unwilling mirror for the denied life of others is exhausting beyond ordinary language. One is continually managing projections. Some will project salvation onto you, others will project accusation. Some will feel unusually peaceful around you and assume you are meant to rescue them. Others will feel exposed and assume you have harmed them. Still others will sense both at once and alternate between devotion and attack. This is not because you are extraordinary in the romantic sense. It is because the psyche instinctively reacts to that which constellates its hidden contents. One must be very careful here not to become grandiose. The archetype of the wounded healer lies close to the empathic disposition, and this archetype easily seduces the ego. You may begin to believe that your suffering gives you special authority, that your pain has made you wiser than others, that your sensitivity proves a superior moral condition. This is illusion. The shadow always waits beneath spiritual identity. To imagine oneself as pure healer is already to have fallen partly asleep. The unconscious loves compensations. Where a person has long felt powerless, it offers fantasies of secret chosenness. Where one has been unseen, it offers the identity of the one who sees all. These compensations are understandable, but they are dangerous, for the one who identifies with the role of awakener may cease to notice how much of their own unresolved need is braided into that role. Sometimes the empath does not want to awaken the collective shadow at all. Sometimes they only want to be loved without having to carry the hidden life of everyone around them. Yet even this wish often becomes entangled in the archetypal burden. One falls in love,